This Career Spotlight is brought to you by the Regina District Industry Education Council and Prairie South Schools. Please help us with our grant applications and our funding if you fill in the survey, also linked at the website. This helps us get or helps us improve our spotlights and also gives us an opportunity to count numbers. We'll have a short presentation followed by a question and answer period. Feel free to use the chat to jot down questions as we go through the presentation. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, Sarah. I will do a screen share and we should be good to go. Come on. Does that look right to you?
It's looking a little cut off to me, but that is the right slide. So this first slide is pretty basic. So like it's been mentioned, my name's Sarah Regent, and I'm the city horticulturalist for the city of Moose Jaw. So I work in the Parks and Recreation department. My educational background is a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, or a BSA, with a major in horticulture science, and that's from the University of Saskatchewan. After convocating and getting this job, I also became an International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist and a professional agrologist registered with the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists. So my job can pretty much be summed up as maintenance and long-term care of parks, green spaces, and boulevards. The first thing most people think of when they think of my job is the planting side of things, particularly the flowers, but also trees and shrubs. And so my position is involved in all aspects of the planting, right from planning, deciding what we're going to plant where, the actual ordering and budgeting of the plant materials, the coordination of getting those plants shipped here, getting them planted in a timely manner, and also quality control of the actual plants we're getting, and also of the planting of them, particularly with trees, because they're going to be there for a very long time. We want to make sure they're planted well so that we avoid future issues, which sort of feeds into my next major thing, which is urban forest health. And this actually takes up the most of my time. Basically what this is making sure that our trees in Moose Jaw are healthy. So scouting for sick trees and then doing what I can for those sick trees or getting them removed before they can infect other trees. So we're doing control of pests, diseases, weeds, stuff that's lethal like Dutch elm disease, also stuff that is more just annoying like forest tent caterpillars and cankerworms. We have all kinds of different diseases that'll do shrubs and turf and flowers that we're worried about, and we're also concerned about weeds. And in my position, I'm particularly concerned about invasive weeds. I also do a lot of public education and answering questions. So in the summer months, this takes up quite a bit of my time. What we're doing basically is fielding questions from the general public. We have lots of people phoning into the office with questions about trees and weed ID and questions about bylaws. And a big part of my job is to answer those questions in a timely manner and sometimes do visits out to these trees to make sure that we have all the information and a proper diagnosis. So we'll go to the next slide. This job is really varied. So I work with a lot of different equipment in a lot of different places. So right now I'm in my office, which is my base, and I spend most of my time here in the winter doing planning. But in the summer, I'm doing a lot more outside, and I do go outside in the winter as well. So we have a picture here of some of my core equipment. A lot of what I do is pretty light. We have other people in the city that are more specialized and trained in working with heavier equipment and, things with engines, the big bucket trucks, the bigger chainsaws, the chippers, the stump grinders, all that good stuff, where I'm doing a lot more of the investigation, the finesse work. So I do have a small pruning saw and some secateurs that I use, particularly in the winter, to prune young trees to make sure they get good structure. I have tools to investigate with, so that's what the mallet is about, to test if trees are hollow. Safety is really important, so that's why we've got some high vis, some goggles, some gloves. I also wear steel toes and a hard hat quite often, just depending on what I'm doing. And spray paint, because a lot of what I do is planning and monitoring. Spray paint's useful to mark trees and mark the ground for when we're planting, so that we can keep track of what we've done to what trees. And keeping track is a lot of what I'm doing right now. So the other picture is our mapping device for our tree inventory. So it's basically a fancy GPS device with lasers in it that takes the location of the tree and also some measurements of the tree, so we know how big it is. And I'm inputting what kind of tree it is and roughly what condition it's in. And if we go to the next slide, I also get to do some really cool stuff like tree injections. So this tree is getting injected for Dutch elm disease. Basically, we're soaking it with fungicide from the inside. And so I'm involved in making sure we have that chemical, identifying what trees to do, and actually doing it, as it is a very technical and specialized kind of application, because it is so different than your standard pesticide applications, which are sprays. I also sometimes do things with the bucket truck, even though we do have a crew that specializes in that, and that is their full-time year-round job, is working with the bucket truck doing pruning. We do some special stuff with it as well. So in that picture, you can just make out a small green rectangle up in the tree, and that's an emerald ash borer trap. So I'm involved in hanging those, monitoring for emerald ash borer, which is an invasive species that has potential to do a lot of damage. And so that, again, takes me outside all over the city, monitoring trees and making sure that they stay healthy. So if we go to the next slide, there's also some things that people don't really realize come with my job. So we have a picture here of Spring Creek. You can see a little bit of purple. That's purple loosestrife. It's a very invasive species, has potential to do a lot of damage to our aquatic ecosystems. And that is actually part of my job, to identify it and make sure we get rid of it. So this was taken just before I went in there with a pair of garden shears and a garbage bag to get those out of there, to prevent them from sending seeds out and spreading. I also do a lot with the tree inventory on the back end data office side. So I'm not only collecting the data in the field with our device, but I'm also making sure that data stays updated. For example, when we remove trees, we need to go in and mark them as removed. We also use this for planning, what we're going to plant where, making sure we have good species diversity, and also tracking where we've lost trees, so that we know if there are certain areas that maybe need a bit more attention. And with this particular job, I'm also involved in mosquito control. So we have a picture of a mosquito trap, and that actually is for testing West Nile. So sometimes with horticulturalist jobs, you get thrown some oddball kind of tasks because you are an outside person, and most horticulturalists have a pretty broad knowledge base. If we go to the next slide, this is a really rewarding job. My favorite part is really seeing plans come to life. I mean, quite literally with horticulture, because you're planting living things. So to go from a sketch on the computer, like we have on the left, to an actual planted orchard on the right is really rewarding. As is making sure that we have really healthy trees and parks, and watching people enjoy being there and enjoy the lovely lush grass and the healthy trees, even if they don't necessarily realize the behind the scenes work that goes into making that possible. It's not without its challenges. So there's some pretty tight timelines, particularly in the summer, when everything's moving very, very quickly. You know, especially early summer when we're planting, we got to make sure those plants are in the ground. We also have questions from the public that you need to answer, you know, within a day or two typically, or get some sort of response. You're juggling a lot of different projects all at once. Everything is seasonal. So you are very busy in spring, summer, and again, kind of in the fall, just before the snow hits, making sure to clean everything up. But all your projects are sort of planned in the fall, winter, and then you pick them up again in the spring or summer, depending on what it is. So you're always juggling different timelines, which can be quite challenging, does require quite a bit of organization to make sure you keep everything straight. Now, the part that most people are very curious about when picking career is, what do you make? So my position makes between $50,000 and $58,000 a year. That is a range because of experience and steps that you can achieve, you know, by doing a good job and being here and getting more experience. Professional agrologists in Saskatchewan typically make somewhere between $65,000 and $95,000. Obviously, there are extremes on either end. That includes a lot of different jobs that are quite different from a horticulturalist. So you have people who are out applying pesticides to field crops. You have people who are specialized in ranching and animal care. You have people specialized in environmental remediation, and we all fall under agrologists. So if you're interested in those particular wages, the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists has a salary survey publicly available on their website that breaks it down by category. And then arborists, I couldn't find as good of data on the wages, but generally you're looking at $40,000 to $76,000 depending on your education level. Generally, being an ISA certified arborist is going to put you into the upper range of that, particularly in Saskatchewan. Here at the city, I do have a pension. That's very common if you get into a municipal job. And mine is 7.5% of wages matched, meaning that I contribute 7.5% of my wages and the city contributes the same amount. I currently get 3 weeks of holidays per year plus an EDO every third Friday. And with loyalty can earn additional weeks under our collective agreement. And I work 8:15 to 5 Monday to Friday, so it's very regular hours. The odd time, because of my position, I will sometimes start at 7:30 in the morning, and that's just because that's when our outside crews start, and occasionally have an evening or weekend work event. And that's because I do work with the public. For example, Trees for New Subdivision is a program that I run. Basically, homeowners order trees through the city, and we give them out for free, but they have to come pick them up. And most people are working during the day, so we hold those pickups outside regular business hours. This job, like I mentioned, is unionized. Very common in municipal world to be unionized. My particular union is CUPE. So we have a collective agreement, and that's how we get things like our pension and benefits. I also have the opportunity to do a lot of employer-provided training. Some of it's required, some of it not. So for example, for me, first aid and chainsaw training are both required because I am out working with blades. Occasionally I am working with or around chainsaws. We need to know about that. And then things like mental health in the workplace, and we have occasional seminars on diversity are offered as well, and they're a really great way to broaden your knowledge base. With the ISA Certified Arborist designation, I do need 30 CEUs, which are continuing education units over a defined 3-year block. The ISA is pretty strict about what counts as a unit. So pre-approved webinars, they also have articles and quizzes that you can do to get those. Whereas the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists requires PAGs maintain 105 CPD hours, so continuing professional development hours over the last 3 years. So moving block, but those are a lot more flexible. They do allow some networking time because networking is really important so that you can ask other people about their experiences. And we're also a member of the Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation Association as a department, and that does give me access to some webinars and conferences and opportunities in that space, more focused on municipal parks and recreation development, how we make those spaces really good for people to be out there and active, which not all horticulturalists are going to do. There's a lot of opportunities in Saskatchewan. There's not very many people who are qualified as arborists or horticulturalists. So if someone's looking for one of those, you would have a very good chance at getting the job. That being said, there's also not a lot of jobs out there. So it is something that might take a bit of patience. But there is a growing awareness of the importance of green infrastructure that I think's making the industry really optimistic and really going to grow forward, especially with the local food movement has helped a lot. As you know, there's the city work that I do, but you could also get into greenhouses, both flower and vegetables. So I've got a picture of a commercial tomato greenhouse, which we do have in Saskatchewan. There's also the nursery, so planting trees, getting them to market. There's market gardens, which is again part of the local food movement, growing veggies for farmers markets, restaurants, small grocery stores. And there's also landscaping for private clients, for private businesses or golf courses. There's a lot of different opportunities to move around and really find your niche within horticulture. And it's a really good base if you're interested in landscape architecture, which is a master's degree, or an advanced plant sciences degree, which would allow you to get into the research plant breeding side of things. And horticulture is great because you have a strong understanding of plants in general, so you can specialize into crops later on if you wish. It's very easy to do. And that's the job. So if there's any questions, happy to take them.
All right. Well, I think that's gonna.
Hi, Sarah. It's Renette. I do have a question for you. Because it's such a specialized field, did you go into university thinking that this is exactly what you wanted to do with your degree?
Absolutely not, actually. I went into university thinking I would do research on renewable resources or developing biofuels, something along those lines. Discovered I didn't particularly like organic chemistry, but I did really like the plant labs. Agriculture has a common first year, and so there are some classes that all BSAs have to take that kind of gives you a sample of everything the college has to offer. And I really liked the plants. I liked the little snippet of horticulture that we got, and I just decided to go for it from there. But no, it's not one that I always knew I would end up in.
Hi, this is Doug Stamen calling. That big park that's right downtown in Moose Jaw, are you responsible for that as well? Is that part of your job?
Yes and no. That's actually a very common question. We do have a dedicated crew lead and summer students that work in that park. So we have 2 permanent staff that are there, 6 or 7 months out of the year, depending on the weather, and then a crew of seasonal staff. And they're dedicated to that park. They're there full-time all summer. I do go in and help them out. I do scout for diseases and stuff for them, but in terms of the actual day-to-day maintenance, no. But the planting side, I do help them coordinate it. Like I order all the flowers for them, but because they're the ones that maintain it, they do have a lot of say in what we actually are planting there.
So because your work is so seasonal, what would your winters look like in your job?
So summers are actually really, really busy. So a good chunk of my winter is just getting everything prepped and ready for summer so that when we need plans, they're just ready to go. Everything is pre-ordered. So I'm ordering annual flowers now, and we'll have that finalized by the end of November. Trees and shrubs will be finalized probably the end of February. So that's a big part of my winter, is just planning all of that and also doing all of the data management. So we talked a little bit about the tree inventory, and that's a big part of my winter as well. I do almost all of my data collection for that in the winter. And I also do a fair bit of pruning in the winter. It's actually better for the trees if you can prune them when they're dormant. So that actually takes up a lot of time, and a lot of people don't realize how much we do over the winter.
And you do,
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah.
you do some, I know when I was a principal, you did some educational outreaches to the school as well.
Yeah, we'll sometimes do that. It just depends on the year and demand. Obviously this year we can't really be going into schools, but I'm doing this as kind of a bit of a sub for that. And yeah, we're also prepping public education over the winter. So people don't necessarily want to hear about how to look for Dutch elm disease in January when there's no leaves and you can't look for it. But we prep all of our social media posts, brochures, everything like that over the winter, and then just schedule it to go out.
And do citizens of Moose Jaw have access to you for questions regarding, I guess, their plants?
Yep, they do. So citizens call me all the time, particularly in the summer, particularly for boulevard trees or park trees, but they can phone for private trees and private yard problems. With my position, the priority is tree questions, because we do have some diseases like Dutch elm disease that we're very concerned about and can spread tree to tree, and the diseases, quite frankly, don't care who owns the tree. So I do go out and do house calls. I check in backyards all the time, but citizens will sometimes just phone about, what to do about this weed, or asking sometimes what did we plant in this bed last year, because they would like to plant that flower. And that's something that absolutely we're happy to help with.
In Moose Jaw, do you use a lot of weed control still, or are you moving away from that? I know in Regina they don't bother anymore. For instance, dandelions, right? Is Moose Jaw in the same spot, or have you not changed? Or
We do still some weed control, like classic herbicides. We've moved to a lot more spot spraying. And so that really reduces how much we're using because we're only spraying it where the weeds like dandelions are really bad. And we do have to use some chemicals for things like leafy spurge, which is very invasive and we have on the edges of the city. Has the potential to really disrupt pasture land and basically make it unusable for cattle. So in those kind of instances, we are using herbicides, but yeah, we are looking to reduce it, only use it where it's necessary. Because yeah, a lot of people are very sensitive to chemicals and the environmental impact of applying a lot of chemicals is a concern. So definitely we're very choosy about when we apply those to weeds and try to use a little bit more cultural practices to keep them under control.
Any more questions?
Yeah, what's your biggest challenge with your occupation? Like one of the things that you would make kids aware of that they should know that they're getting into when they get into your area?
Well, that's a very good question. I think like they gotta understand that it's varying all the time. Like we do have climate change to contend with, which does cause problems. We've seen some really bad winters and a lot of our insect pests are cyclical. So you're not really getting into something where, week to week or year to year, it's very predictable. Like my job looks quite different in a year where we're going to have a bad caterpillar year versus a year with no caterpillars, but a lot of windstorms. Like a lot of it just has so much control, like that's out of your control, in terms of like the biology of it, that it is definitely something to be considered, that it's not one that you can really get comfy and kind of do an autopilot in. It's always shifting. And like we're always getting new technologies, new regulations around pesticides. We're getting new pests, like I mentioned about detecting emerald ash borer. That is not something that was on the radar when I started this position 4.5 years ago. So there's always things to be learning, and it's very dynamic, and you really got to keep up. Otherwise, you're going to get outdated pretty quick.